I want you to close your eyes for just a second and imagine standing on this windswept hill in a place called Burgundy.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And the year is 52 BC. You are Julius Caesar.
That is a heavy burden right off the bat.
It really is. So you're looking out at this massive plateau rising steeply in front of you. And inside this huge fortress on that high ground are like 80,000 hostile Gallic warriors.
And they want nothing more than to see you dead.
Exactly. But that is actually only half of your problem.
Because there's the other army.
Right. Because advancing on your rear, coming directly for your back, is this massive relief army of well over 100,000 men.
I mean, it's the ultimate tactical nightmare.
Yeah.
You are completely surrounded, trapped between this entrenched enemy above you and just a tidal wave of enemy reinforcements behind you.
So what do? Because you don't retreat.
No, not if you're Caesar.
If you're a Caesar, you build a fortress facing inwards toward the 80,000. And then you build another fortress facing outward toward the 100,000.
And you fight them both at the exact same time.
Right. And this isn't some, theoretical tactical puzzle. This is the actual historical situation Julius Caesar engineered for himself.
It's just staggering to think about.
It really is. And I should mention right here at the top, today's deep dive is based entirely on a really phenomenal deep research study by Mick Prichter.
Over at battlefieldtravels.com.
Yes, exactly. And the study is just incredibly thorough. It draws on ancient primary sources, firsthand exploration of the actual battlefield in France, and modern GIS terrain analysis.
Which is so crucial for understanding how this impossible siege actually played out.
Right at the site of Alesia.
Because the stakes here, I mean, they literally could not be higher. We are looking at how engineering genius and absolute iron discipline secured Rome's conquest of Gaul.
The fate of an entire nation.
Yes. And Caesar's political and literal survival, honestly, it all hung in the balance on this single plot of land.
So to understand how he survived, we really have to look at the strategic game board leading up to this moment.
Let's wind the clock back a bit.
Right, to 58 BC. Because Caesar didn't just stumble into Gaul by accident.
No, he was the proconsul.
Right, which is essentially a governor with supreme military command. He had Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul.
But from everything we know, his campaigns over the next few years weren't just about, securing Rome's northern borders.
Yeah, there was this desperate personal political calculus going on.
Very much so. His campaigns were driven by two intertwined goals. The first was the strategic imperative of securing Rome's frontier against tribal incursions.
Because the Romans still carried that generational trauma, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sack of Rome by Gauls centuries earlier, in 390 BC. That left a deep scar, so there was a legitimate desire to pacify the north.
But the second imperative?
Purely personal. Caesar had amassed just staggering, almost incomprehensible debt.
To finance his political rise back in Rome.
Exactly. He needed plunder to pay his creditors.
Yeah.
And he needed unparalleled military glory to eclipse his political rivals.
Primarily Pompey the Great.
Right, because in the Roman Republic, military glory translates directly to political power.
You conquer a province, you enrich your soldiers, you send gold back to the treasury.
And suddenly the populace loves you and the Senate fears you.
And the really crazy thing is, the way we know so much about this specific conquest is because Caesar literally wrote the book on it.
The Commentarii de Bello Gallico.
Right, Battles in Gaul. And he wrote it himself in the third person as the campaign actually unfolded.
Which is such a brilliant, if manipulative, move.
He details how between 58 and 53 BC, he systematically crushed these successive tribal coalitions. You have the Helvetii at Bibracte in 58 BC.
Then the Belgae at the River Sambre in 57 BC.
The Nervi in 54 BC. He even launched these unprecedented expeditions across the Rhine into Germania.
And over the channel to Britain. He was just relentless.
Right. He was operating this massive machine of conquest, subduing these tribes piecemeal before they could ever form a united front.
But, we have to talk about the source material itself.
Oh, for sure. Because if a general today writes his own after-action report and then publishes it for the entire public to read in real time,
we would naturally assume it's heavily biased.
Exactly. We'd look for this spin. So how much of this history is just Caesar building his own myth? Because when I read the commentary, it feels like political propaganda.
Oh, it absolutely was a self-promotion tool.
Designed to make him look like a demigod to the Roman Forum.
Yeah, writing it in the third person to sound objective, Caesar ordered the legions forward. Caesar saw the danger.
It creates this veneer of detached historical truth.
It's a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation. But what makes it so fascinating for military historians is that it's this unique blend of PR and tactical reality.
So he isn't just, like, making up the battles out of whole cloth.
Not at all.
Mm.
Modern archaeological evidence, which Mick Prichter's study at battlefieldtravels.com highlights extensively, consistently backs up the physical reality.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When Caesar writes that he built a certain type of defensive ditch of a specific width at a specific choke point.
Archaeologists can actually find it.
Exactly. They go dig there with ground-penetrating radar, and they find the ditch exactly where he said it would be.
Wow.
So while he certainly exaggerated enemy numbers to make his victories look more heroic.
And definitely downplayed his own tactical blunders to appease the Senate.
Right. The physical engineering, the broad strokes of the military maneuvers, those are historically solid.
So we have this highly effective, highly motivated Roman commander.
Operating what is essentially a state-sanctioned private army.
Right. But to understand why these campaigns eventually triggered such a massive, desperate revolt by 52 BC, we need to look at how these opposing forces actually functioned.
Because this wasn't two identical armies clashing.
No, this was asymmetric warfare on a grand scale. Let's look at the Roman Republican armies first.
By the time of Caesar, following the Marian reforms a generation earlier, the Roman legion was a professional standing army.
And their core advantages were, what, strict discipline and engineering.
Strict, merciless discipline, and truly unparalleled engineering capabilities.
That engineering aspect is what really separates them from almost every other ancient military, isn't
No,
it?
absolutely. They weren't just shock infantry. They were heavily armed combat engineers.
That's a great way to put it.
It is the defining characteristic of the Roman military machine. They excelled at rapid entrenchment, bridge building, complex siegecraft.
Like when Caesar bridged the Rhine in just 10 days.
Exactly. Roman organization wasn't just about fighting in a disciplined line. It was about labor.
Right, because when they marched into hostile territory, at the end of the day, they didn't just sleep in a field.
No, they built a fortified camp, a castra, every single night.
They dug a ditch, built a rampart with the excavated earth, topped it with a palisade.
They created a secure forward operating base every single night.
It's incredible application of manual labor to tactical security. You can't really ambush a Roman army at night if they're sleeping inside a custom-built wooden fortress.
You really can't. And on top of that, they established robust logistics lines stretching all the way back to friendly territory.
Supplemented by aggressive local foraging, of course.
And forced requisitions from allied tribes. But, no army is without a vulnerability.
Right. So what was the tactical blind spot for the legions?
Cavalry. Their major weakness was cavalry. The Roman legions were the supreme heavy infantry of the ancient world, but they lacked effective, native, mobile horsemen.
They just didn't have that equestrian tradition of the steppe or the northern tribes.
Exactly.
And in ancient warfare, if you don't have cavalry, you can't scout effectively.
You can't screen your infantry from flanking maneuvers.
And you definitely can't run down a broken enemy to finish them off.
Caesar recognized this vulnerability early on. And being the ultimate pragmatist, he fixed it.
How?
By integrating Germanic horse auxiliaries into his army. He realized the Germanic tribes across the Rhine produced exceptional horsemen.
So he just hired the best cavalry in the region to cover his own blind spot.
Exactly. Now let's flip the board and look at the Gallic tribes.
Their advantages seem to be the exact inverse of the Romans.
Completely. They had immense manpower drawn from a massive population across modern-day France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland.
And exceptionally high cavalry mobility. The Gallic nobility fought on horseback and were culturally bred for it.
But their fatal flaw was their command structure.
Or lack of it, really.
Right. Gaul wasn't a single nation with a centralized government. It was a patchwork of distinct, fiercely independent, and often violently rival tribes.
You had the Aedui, the Arverni, the Sequani, the Treveri.
To name a few.
It's kind of like trying to manage a fragile coalition of modern allied nations, but without a supreme allied commander.
That's a perfect analogy. Each tribe has its own command doctrines, its own local blood feuds.
And its own political agendas. It's nearly impossible to get them to execute a single, coordinated, multi-year campaign plan.
Especially against a monolithic machine like Rome, where Caesar speaks and 60,000 men move in unison.
Right. A fractured coalition is inherently vulnerable to that.
This fragmentation left them completely exposed to Caesar's strategy of defeat in detail.
For years, he played them against each other. He'd ally with one tribe to crush another.
Then turn on his former allies when it suited him.
And the Gauls, relying on individual warrior prowess and mass frontal charges, they just couldn't sustain long, grinding campaigns.
They didn't have the logistical tail, the administrative infrastructure, or that engineering mindset of the Romans.
So for 6 years, Caesar just uses this structural advantage to tear Gaul apart piece by piece.
Until 52 BC.
Right. In 52 BC, the dynamic shifts fundamentally.
Yeah.
The Gauls finally find the one element they were missing.
A unifying leader. One who actually understands Roman vulnerabilities and refuses to play into Caesar's hands.
Let's talk about the state of Gaul at this moment, because by early 52 BC, things had reached a boiling point.
Years of Roman requisitions, the taking of noble hostages, brutal suppression of minor uprising.
The constant presence of occupying garrisons. It pushed the tribes to the edge of despair.
The economic extraction alone was devastating, and crucially, at this specific moment, Caesar was temporarily absent.
He was down south in Cisalpine Gaul, right?
Yes, handling administrative duties and keeping an eye on the treacherous political situation back in Rome.
And into this strategic vacuum steps Vercingetorix.
A nobleman of the Arverni tribe.
But his rise to power wasn't exactly smooth, was it?
Oh, not at all. He faced severe resistance from within his own tribe. He was initially expelled from the capital by pro-Roman factions.
Including his own uncle, right? Who thought a revolt was basically suicide.
Exactly. But Vercingetorix didn't give up. He retreated to the uplands, rallied a massive base of rural supporters, and forcefully took control of his tribe.
And then he starts sending embassies to the neighboring tribes.
Urging them to put aside their ancestral grievances.
Through sheer charisma, military threat, and a shared hatred of Rome, he emerges as the supreme commander of a true pan-Gallic coalition.
For the first time, these disparate tribes were uniting under a single strategic vision.
And he didn't just unite them politically, he revolutionized how they fought.
He understood that meeting the Roman legions in a traditional pitched battle on flat ground was a death sentence.
All right, the Gallic infantry would just shatter against the Roman shield wall.
So instead, he enacts a unified strategy of severe attrition.
Scorched earth.
It was a brutal, draconian choice, but strategically brilliant.
He ordered the burning of thousands of Gallic villages, the destruction of their own crops.
Driving away all livestock, because he recognized that the Roman war machine ran on calories and forage.
I mean, a Roman army of 50,000 men, plus thousands of cavalry horses and baggage animals, consumes a staggering amount of food every day.
If he could deny them local supplies, he could starve the Roman beast.
But convincing your own people to burn their ancestral homes and destroy their own food supplies, that requires a terrifying level of authority.
It shows just how deeply Vercingetorix controlled this new coalition.
And the really terrifying thing for the Romans is that the strategy starts to work.
The Roman supply lines are stretched to the breaking point.
And then in May of 52 BC, Vercingetorix actually hands Caesar a very bloody, very public defeat.
At a place called Gergovia.
Which was an oppidum, right? A fortified hilltop town.
Yes. Situated in incredibly rough, steep terrain. Caesar, perhaps overconfident or just desperate for a decisive victory, attempted an assault.
And it completely breaks down. The terrain disrupts the Roman formations. The Gauls counterattack fiercely from the high ground.
And Caesar is forced to sound the retreat.
But the retreat turns chaotic.
The Roman sources admit to losing over 700 legionaries.
Which is a significant blow. But far more devastatingly, they admit to losing 46 centurions in that single engagement.
That is a staggering, irreplaceable loss of veteran leadership.
We really need to explain why that specific number is so catastrophic. Losing 46 centurions in one afternoon.
It's massive.
It's akin to a modern infantry brigade losing its entire corps of veteran platoon sergeants and company commanders in a single firefight.
These are the men who have spent a decade learning how to hold a line under pressure.
Right. How does an army function the next day after a decapitation strike like that?
It barely does. It must have completely shattered the aura of Roman invincibility that Caesar had been cultivating for 6 years.
It had to have shaken his prestige, both within his ranks and among the Gallic observers.
The centurions were the operational backbone of the legion, the enforcers of discipline.
The tactical leaders directing the centuries in the heat of combat.
Losing that many veteran officers means your army is fundamentally degraded. They can't execute complex maneuvers or maintain unit cohesion under stress.
and Vercingetorix immediately capitalized on this psychological victory.
He used the success at Gergovia to persuade the wavering tribes, the ones sitting on the fence, terrified of Caesar, to fully commit to the revolt.
He proved to them that the Romans bled just like anyone else, that Rome could be beaten.
So Caesar realizes if he doesn't act immediately, he isn't just going to lose the campaign.
The entire province of Gaul will be lost. His army will be destroyed piecemeal as they try to retreat to Italy.
And his political enemies back in Rome will strip him of his command and prosecute him.
His back is completely against the wall, so he responds with terrifying speed.
He recognizes momentum is slipping away. He crosses into the territory of the Aedui,
who were nominal Roman allies but were starting to shift their allegiance after Gergovia.
Right, and Caesar doesn't use diplomacy here. He ruthlessly seizes hostages from the Aedui nobility to force their compliance and secure his flanks.
Then he concentrates all his dispersed legions into a single massive fist.
So they can't be picked off in isolation.
He forces a march to intercept Vercingetorix, and in July of 52 BC, they clash at the Vingan River.
Now, this isn't a siege. This is a massive cavalry engagement.
Vercingetorix attempts to hit the Roman marching column, using his superior Gallic cavalry to cripple Caesar's baggage train.
He wanted to force a surrender, but this is where Caesar's foresight pays off.
Right, because he counters the Gallic cavalry assault by unleashing those Germanic horse auxiliaries he had integrated.
He counters indigenous mobility with imported superior mobility.
The Germanic cavalry fiercely counterattacks, breaks the Gallic horsemen, and routs them.
The battle at the Vingan River is the pivotal turning point before the siege.
Because by crushing the Gallic cavalry, Caesar neutralized Vercingetorix's primary offensive weapon.
He forced Vercingetorix to abandon his hit-and-run tactics.
He could no longer dictate the terms of engagement in the open field. He had to go on the defensive.
So Vercingetorix realizes his army is demoralized, his cavalry is shattered, and Caesar is marching straight for him.
He needs a place to hide. A stronghold where he can regroup, protect his infantry, and buy time to call in a massive allied relief force.
He needs an impregnable fortress, and he chooses Alesia,
which sets the geographical and tactical parameters for one of the most intense sieges in human history.
Let's guide the listener through this terrain because the topography dictates every single military decision made over the next 2 months.
So if you were visiting the site today, it's located near the modern village of Alise-Sainte-Reine in the Burgundy region of France.
You are looking at a massive, steep limestone plateau, Montossois.
It rises abruptly, nearly 200 meters above the surrounding plains.
It is a sheer geological fortress, flanked on 2 sides by river valleys, the Oise and the Ozerine.
The local Mandubi tribe had already established a settlement there, right?
Yes, and fortified the edges of the plateau with timber and earth ramparts, gates, defensive ditches.
When you stand on that plateau and look outward, it functions as a natural amphitheater of surrounding hills,
offering dominating, unobstructed views of the valleys below in every direction.
It's the textbook definition of commanding the high ground.
So Vercingetorix marches his army up that slope and entrenches.
He has roughly 80,000 warriors inside this stronghold, battered but intact.
However, before Caesar can completely encircle the base of the plateau, Vercingetorix makes a critical strategic move.
He sends his remaining cavalry out into the night, slipping through the gaps in the arriving Roman columns,
with a desperate message: disperse to the allied tribes across all of Gaul and beg them to raise a massive relief army to come save us.
Wow. And Caesar arrives in September of 52 BC.
Commanding about 10 legions, plus auxiliaries and cavalry, giving him roughly 60,000 to 70,000 men.
He conducts a reconnaissance of the site, looks at this imposing 200-meter slope,
observes 80,000 entrenched, desperate warriors manning the ramparts at the summit,
and realizes instantly that a direct frontal assault up that hill would be mass suicide.
Even Roman discipline cannot overcome those physics.
Which brings up a strategic question I always struggle with. Basic military doctrine dictates that you never willingly surrender the high ground.
Right.
So Vercingetorix making a stand here makes perfect tactical sense. It's easily defensible. But by putting his entire pan-Gallic coalition inside this single isolated location, didn't he effectively trap himself?
He did. He handed Caesar the initiative. It is the great paradox of Alesia.
The exact landscape features that made it an impregnable defensive position also made it the perfect prison.
Vercingetorix deliberately chose Alesia because he knew Caesar could not assault it. He wanted to force Caesar into a prolonged static siege.
You have a logistical calculation.
Yes. He believed Roman logistics, stretched thin across hostile territory, would fail before his own supplies inside the Oppidum ran out.
He was banking on the relief army arriving in time to crush the besieging Romans against the plateau.
Exactly. It's a battle of logistical attrition. Vercingetorix is betting his food lasts longer than Caesar's patience.
But he underestimated Roman engineering capacity, didn't he?
Vastly. He assumed the sheer physical circumference of the plateau and the complexity of the river valleys would make it physically impossible for Caesar to hermetically blockade him.
He thought the rugged terrain would keep the siege porous, allowing supplies to trickle in.
But Caesar finds himself in a terrifying bind. He cannot attack up the hill.
And he can't maintain a loose blockade because 80,000 men will just break out.
And he certainly can't pack up his camp and retreat to Italy. His intelligence network tells him a massive relief army is being raised to hunt him down.
If he retreats, he'll be destroyed on the march. So his only option, and this is just unadulterated audacity, is to build a trap around the trap.
He initiates a masterclass in siegecraft that is still studied in military academies 2 millennia later.
He decides to completely seal off the plateau by building 2 distinct, continuous lines of heavy fortifications.
Let's break down the mechanics of these lines, because the sheer scale is difficult to comprehend.
The first line is the contravallation, the inner line.
18 kilometers in circumference, completely wrapping around the base of the plateau, facing inward toward Alesia to keep Vercingetorix trapped.
Built by his 50 to 60,000 legionaries doing the back-breaking digging.
Using just muscle power, spades, and pickaxes. First, facing the hill, they dug a massive primary ditch.
20 feet wide and 9 feet deep, right? With vertical sides.
Yes, to prevent anyone from climbing out once they fell in. And where the topography allowed, Roman engineers actually diverted the Ouse and Ozeran rivers to flood this trench.
They built a 20-foot wide moat around a mountain.
Essentially, yes. Behind that flooded trench, they left a gap of level ground and then built the main defensive works.
A rampart of packed earth, topped with a timber palisade 12 feet high.
And along the top, heavy wooden towers roughly every 80 feet to house missile troops. Archers, slingers, torsion artillery.
But, a wall and a ditch alone can be overcome by 80,000 determined men.
Which is why the obstacle belts in front of the wall were so crucial.
The traps. The source material from battlefieldtravels.com details these specific traps, and they are horrific.
They really are. First, you have the Sipi.
Deep trenches filled with heavy tree trunks with sharpened branches pointing outward, interwoven so they couldn't be pulled apart.
Then, in front of the Sipi, the lilies, ancient punji pits.
3-foot-deep holes arranged in a staggered pattern with fire-hardened wooden stakes driven into the bottom.
Camouflaged with brush and twigs.
And finally, furthest out, the stimuli. Wooden blocks embedded with razor-sharp iron hooks buried just under the surface.
If we look at the psychology and physics of combat engineering, these obstacles were not merely designed to inflict casualties.
They were designed to strip the enemy of their momentum.
Exactly. The primary goal of a massed infantry charge is kinetic energy. You want to hit the line with maximum force and speed.
The Sipi, the lilies and the stimuli, broke that momentum hundreds of feet before the Gauls ever reached the 20-foot ditch.
Imagine a Gallic warrior sprinting forward. His foot catches a buried iron stimulus hook. He falls.
The man behind him trips over him and falls into a lily pit, impaling himself.
The entire formation stumbles, compacts, and halts right in the pre-measured kill zone of the Roman archers and artillery.
It turns a rapid assault into a slow-motion slaughter. It's brilliantly terrifying, weaponizing the ground itself.
So that is the inner line, 18 kilometers of continuous death trap.
But while they're building this, Caesar gets hard intelligence from his scouts. The Gallic cavalry succeeded.
The relief army is mobilizing, and it's coming for him.
Caesar cannot abandon the siege. So he orders his exhausted legionaries to turn around and do it all over again, facing the opposite direction.
This is the circumvallation, the outer defensive line.
Even longer, 21 kilometers in length, facing outward to protect the Roman rear.
Utilizing the exact same system of trenches, walls, towers, and hitting traps.
And between these 2 lines, in the narrow corridor of space remaining, Caesar built protected infantry camps, cavalry forts, and redoubts.
I really want the listener to sit with the scale of this physical achievement.
This isn't just digging a trench for a few days to block a road. This is constructing 2 entirely new, heavily fortified national borders totaling nearly 40 kilometers in length.
They are clear-cutting entire forests for timber, moving hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of earth, forging thousands of iron hooks.
Averting rivers, and doing all of this heavy manual labor while on starvation rations, constantly under the threat of hit-and-run attacks from the Gauls.
The logistical endurance required from the Roman legionaries is almost unbelievable. It's the ultimate testament to the Roman legion functioning as an industrial labor force.
They quite literally dug their way to survival. But while the Romans were sweating and bleeding outside, the reality of this blockade was creating a profound humanitarian catastrophe inside Alesia.
Because inside Alesia, you have Vercingetorix and his 80,000 warriors, but you also have the indigenous civilian population of the Mandubi tribe,
Whose town this originally was. As the weeks drag on into October, the supplies vanish.
The grain stores are empty, the livestock is eaten. Vercingetorix was faced with a brutal, unavoidable calculation.
He had to preserve whatever meager rations were left solely for his combat effective.
He could not afford to feed non-combatants. The math of starvation does not allow for compassion.
So he made the agonizing decision to expel the Mandubi civilians.
He forced the sick, the elderly, the women, and the children out of the gates of their own city, pushing them down the slope toward the Roman lines.
Hoping that Caesar, bound by some unwritten rules of civilized war, would allow these refugees to pass through the Roman fortifications.
But Caesar is a man defined by a cold, relentless military logic. He completely refused to compromise the integrity of his blockade.
He issued strict orders. No one passes. He denied the civilians passage through the Roman lines.
So you have this nightmare scenario unfolding. Tens of thousands of civilians trapped in the barren no-man's land between the two armies.
The Gauls lock the gates and won't let them back up. The Romans man the walls and won't let them through.
And as a result, over the course of days and weeks, the civilian population slowly starved to death in the open space,
while the soldiers of both armies watched from their respective fortifications. It's profoundly dark.
Very dark.
From a purely strategic standpoint, I struggle to understand the necessity. Was Caesar's refusal just cruelty designed to terrorize the Gauls, or was it unavoidable military necessity?
In the context of ancient siege warfare, it was a calculated, cold-blooded military necessity.
Because allowing them to pass would relieve the logistical pressure on Vercingetorix.
Exactly. It would mean the remaining food inside Alesia would last weeks longer for the Gallic warriors.
The entire mechanism Caesar was relying on to win without launching a suicidal assault was starvation.
If he eased that pressure out of pity, he directly jeopardized the lives of his own 60,000 men, who are currently trapped themselves with dwindling supplies.
It perfectly illustrates the horrific logic of a siege. Hunger is not a byproduct of the strategy. Hunger is the primary weapon.
If he lets them through, the siege drags on, and time was the one resource Caesar was completely out of.
Because while this tragedy is unfolding, his scouts return with terrifying news.
In late September or early October, the horizon finally darkened. The Pan-Gallic relief army had arrived.
This brings us to the absolute climax of the campaign, the two-front battle.
Before we get into the tactical maneuvers, we have to talk about the numbers.
Because they dictate the sheer desperation of the Roman position. The exact numbers of the relief army have been debated for centuries, right?
Ancient sources, heavily influenced by Caesar's own writings, claim it was an incomprehensible force of between 250,000 to 330,000 warriors.
Which we naturally assume is inflated to make his victory look more miraculous back in Rome.
Yes. Modern historians estimate a lower but still massive figure. The general consensus places the relief army at roughly 100,000 to 150,000 men.
Even using the most conservative estimates, the math is horrifying for the Romans.
Caesar's 60,000 men, strung out across 40 kilometers of walls, were outnumbered more than 2 to 1 by the relief army alone.
And that doesn't even factor in the 80,000 desperate warriors still trapped inside the inner ring. The Romans are the meat in a vice.
The Roman lines were incredibly thin. 60,000 men guarding 40 kilometers of walls means the defense lacks depth in any one sector.
So the first assaults began. The Gallic relief army surges against the outer ditches of the circumvallation.
And at the exact same moment, Vercingetorix observes the assault from his high vantage point and launches a massive sortie down the hill.
Crashing against the inner lines of the contravallation, the Romans are instantly forced to fight a massive coordinated battle on two fronts simultaneously.
This is where the months of grueling labor paid off. The obstacle belts functioned exactly as designed.
And what truly held the line in these initial assaults was the Roman torsion artillery, right?
Yes. The ballistae, throwing heavy bolts or stones with devastating force, and the scorpions, smaller, highly accurate, heavy crossbows.
These engines were firing continuously from the wooden towers, raining projectiles down on the tightly packed Gallic formations.
The casualty rate was horrific before they even reached the first ditch.
But the Gauls don't just give up, they adapt. The next night, they launch a massive night attack.
They bring fascines, huge, tied bundles of wood, brush, and earth to throw into the 20-foot trenches to create land bridges.
And hundreds of ladders to scale the 12-foot walls. Fighting in the pitch black, it degrades into brutal hand-to-hand combat on top of the ramparts.
The night attack was terrifying. Command and control breaks down in the dark. But again, the defensive depth saved the Romans.
Because the Gauls had to fight their way blindly through the hidden lilies and stimuli.
Across a partially filled ditch and scramble up a steep wall. Their unit cohesion was completely shattered.
When they reached the top of the rampart, they were met by highly disciplined legionaries, fighting in tight formation behind heavy shields.
The Romans hold the line through the night, but they are bleeding, exhausted, and running out of missiles.
And the real breaking point comes 2 days later. The commanders of the Gallic relief army identify a critical weak sector in the Roman line near a hill called Montrea.
Due to the local topography, the Roman outer wall at Montrea had to be built on a downward slope.
Meaning the attacking Gauls would actually have the high ground advantage against the Roman defenders. It negated the defensive advantage of the wall.
Recognizing this, the relief army takes 60,000 of their best warriors, marches them secretly through the hills at night, and positions them just behind Montrea.
At noon, they launch a devastating, concentrated assault exclusively on that weak point.
And Vercingetorix, coordinating his timing perfectly, launches his entire trapped garrison at the inner line in the exact same sector.
It is the absolute crisis of the battle. The Roman lines at Montrea are buckling under the sheer, localized weight of over 100,000 attacking warriors.
Fighting a two-front war is the nightmare scenario. If you pull reserve troops from one side to reinforce the front, the back immediately collapses.
So how on earth did Caesar manage to shift troops to Montrea without the rest of his 40-kilometer perimeter disintegrating?
This is where we see Caesar's brilliance as a dynamic battlefield manager. He utilized the geometric concept of interior lines of communication.
Because the Romans occupied the space between the two circular walls, they were on the inside of the track.
If Caesar needed to move a cohort of troops from the south wall to the north wall, they could march in a straight line directly across the diameter of the circle.
The Gauls on the outside, however, had to march all the way around the massive 21-kilometer circumference.
It's a massive geometric advantage. Caesar used his limited reserves like a modern rapid reaction force.
He positioned himself at a high vantage point, utilizing flags, horns, and runners to dynamically shift cohorts to threatened sectors.
Constantly plugging the leaks in the dam faster than the Gauls could exploit them.
But even with interior lines, the sheer math at Montrea is failing. The Roman line is breaking. The Gauls are pouring over the ramparts.
This is the cinematic climax. Caesar recognizes that the wall is lost. And if that wall falls, his entire army is massacred, and Rome loses Gaul forever.
He has exhausted his infantry reserves, so he takes the ultimate gamble. He personally rallies his final, untouched reserve, his Germanic cavalry.
He makes a decision that defies standard siege logic.
Yeah.
He doesn't send the cavalry to plug the hole in the wall.
He takes them outside the fortifications entirely. He leads them out of a gate in a quiet sector of the outer line.
Wearing his distinctive scarlet cloak, the paludamentum, so every man on the battlefield can see him.
He leads a massive, sweeping flanking maneuver across the open plain, completely bypasses the brutal infantry meat grinder at the wall, rides around the flank, and slams his heavy cavalry directly into the unprotected rear of the 60,000 Gauls assaulting Montrea.
It was a devastating, perfectly timed shock tactic. The Gallic infantry, entirely focused on pushing forward over the Roman walls, suddenly found themselves hit from behind by thousands of heavy horsemen.
The physical impact was terrible, but the psychological impact was catastrophic.
At the exact same moment Caesar's cavalry hit their rear, the exhausted Roman legionaries on the inside of the wall found a final surge of adrenaline.
Seeing their commander entering the fray, they repelled Vercingetorix's simultaneous assault. They unleashed a volley of their heavy javelins, the pila, shattering the Gallic shields.
Drew their short swords and countercharged into close-quarters combat.
The psychological shock of seeing Caesar's cavalry suddenly appear behind them completely breaks the spirit of the Gallic relief army.
They realize they are now the ones surrounded. Panic spreads like a virus. The massive Gallic formation shatters,
They abandon the assault and begin a frantic, disorganized retreat into the surrounding forests. The Roman cavalry pursues them mercilessly.
cutting them down by the thousands until nightfall. The massive relief army, the last hope of a free Gaul, simply dissolves into the countryside.
The tactical vice is broken. The threat from the outside is eliminated.
And Vercingetorix, standing on his plateau, watches the relief army disintegrate. He is left completely isolated inside his fortress with no hope of rescue, no food, and an army that has fought itself to exhaustion.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath. The very next morning, the reality of the mathematics settles over Alesia.
Vercingetorix accepts that the war is over. He rides down from the plateau, fully armed and armored, approaches a Roman camp, and silently casts his weapons at Caesar's feet.
He surrenders himself to save what is left of his people. That single dramatic act effectively ends the last true hope of a united Gallic resistance against Rome.
It secured Roman control over the entirety of Gaul for the next 4 centuries, fundamentally shifting the cultural and linguistic trajectory of Western Europe.
And it provided Caesar with the ultimate political capital he so desperately craved. But what is truly fascinating is how this specific plot of land is remembered today.
Fast forward to the 1860s, Emperor Napoleon III of France is on the throne.
He is looking to solidify his own somewhat shaky political legitimacy and decides to link his modern French Empire to the grand imperial legacy of Julius Caesar.
He orders massive, state-funded archaeological excavations of the site at Alesia.
And when his engineers begin to dig, they find exactly what Caesar described in his Commentarii.
They excavate the complex ditch systems, find the pila heads, thousands of Roman and Gallic coins and skeletal remains. They empirically validated the history.
But Napoleon III did more than just dig trenches. He wanted a monument.
He erected a massive, towering bronze statue designed by the sculptor Aimé Millet right on the edge of the Maoswa Plateau overlooking the battlefield.
But here is the fascinating twist. It isn't a statue of the victorious Julius Caesar.
It is a romanticized, heroic statue of Vercingetorix.
That is such a striking historical inversion. The French government erects a colossal heroic monument to honor the general who decisively lost the battle and lost his nation's independence.
It speaks to the power of national myth-making. During the 19th century, Vercingetorix was resurrected not as a defeated chieftain, but as the first true patriot of France.
For the French, he became the ultimate symbol of fierce national resistance against foreign imperialism. The statue dominates the valley today, acting as a deliberate, romantic counterpoint to Caesar's cold, historical victory.
And if you travel there today, you can actually interact with this history. In 2012, they opened the MuséoParc Alésia,
which features a spectacular modern interpretive center. But for a military history enthusiast, the most compelling aspect is that they have painstakingly reconstructed full-scale sections of the Roman circumvallation.
You can physically walk up to the flooded ditches, examine the ramparts, and stand beneath the massive wooden towers.
It bridges the gap between text and reality. Walking that ground changes your entire understanding of the battle.
When you stand on the edge of that 200-meter plateau and look down at the plains, you understand viscerally why Vercingetorix felt secure and why Caesar refused to launch an infantry assault up that gradient.
The terrain dictated every single tactical choice.
So just to pull all of this together, if you are standing in front of a classroom of students studying ancient history and the curriculum covers the evolution of siege warfare, what are the core enduring lessons we extract from Alesia?
I think the primary inescapable lesson is that extreme discipline and superior military engineering will very often overcome vastly superior numbers.
The Gauls possessed the sheer manpower, they possessed a desperate motivation to save their homeland, and they commanded the high ground.
But the Romans possessed a systematized approach to warfare. Alesia proves conclusively that the spade, the pickaxe, and the organized application of labor were just as deadly, if not more so, than the sword in the arsenal of a Roman legion.
It is the ultimate historical triumph of organized, logistical labor applied to combat.
The spade and the axe over the sword. It perfectly encapsulates how the Roman legions quite literally dug their way out of annihilation and into total victory.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. And I want to explicitly acknowledge and thank BattleFieldTravels.com for the incredible source material and deep topographical research that made this exploration possible.
The level of rigorous detail in Mick Prichter's work is exactly what allows us to look past the myths and understand the brutal mechanical realities of these ancient conflicts so clearly.
Absolutely. For anyone listening who wants to go further into the weeds of this battle, you can access additional information, primary source translations, GIS maps, and hundreds of other detailed battle and campaign studies on their website.
It is an indispensable resource for understanding how terrain shapes conflict.
We have spent the last hour dissecting the engineering, the tactical maneuvers, and the horrific realities of a massive siege. But I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay, lay it on us.
Caesar's victory at Alesia gave him everything he desired. He conquered a wealthy province, amassed incomprehensible personal wealth, and forged an intensely loyal, highly experienced veteran army that believed he was invincible.
That specific victory at Alesia is exactly what provided him the power and the leverage to eventually march on Rome, cross the Rubicon, and permanently end the Roman Republic.
So ask yourself this. What if Vercingetorix had simply refused to be trapped at Alesia?
Oh, that's a good question.
What if he had abandoned the psychological safety of the high ground, sacrificed the stronghold, and strictly maintained his hit-and-run, scorched earth guerrilla war of attrition?
Would Caesar's army have starved in the field?
Would the Roman Republic have survived its own internal rot, and would Gaul have remained free?
It is the ultimate historical what-if, and it all pivots on the decision to stop running and build a wall on Mont Ossois.
Something to mull over until next time. Keep digging into the past.